this is a nod to mentors that you have to do more than say, I see potential. Let me bring them in. And here's the access to an opportunity. She saw my potential. She brought me in and she said, now, what is it that you want to do? Okay, here's the pathway. We've created it. And how do you want to do it? Okay, let me open the door. And that has been the big difference.
Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus, doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working full-time, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life, and now I'm on a mission to create community for other BIPOC women to complete their doctorate degrees. Join me as I discuss the ups and downs of pursuing a doctoral degree. I'll be sharing personal stories, and I'm bringing some friends along for revealing conversations about their doctoral journey and provide inspiration for others to level up as doc students. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus, and I'm here again today with a special guest. We have Dr. Wilkerson, who is an amazing scholar and also a friend as well. We've been able to collaborate on several scholarly works, and she's here today to drop some gems and to help those who are thinking about grad school or are pursuing their degrees right now. And so I'm going to read her bio and then we'll get right into the interview. Dr. Amanda Wilkerson is a scholar and social reformer who examines academia and analyzes K through 12 student achievement in order to better understand enhancing the human condition. She is a tireless advocate for equity and excellence in higher education who seeks to build a better world for individuals and institutions through cooperation, collaboration, and community engagement. Currently, Dr. Wilkerson serves as an assistant professor in the College of Community Innovation and Education at the University of Central Florida. She is also an affiliated faculty member and visiting scholar with the Center of Minority Serving Institutions at Rutgers University. A proud graduate of Florida A&M University, Dr. Wilkerson has always expressed a sincere commitment to promoting the common good by teaching and mentoring young people who face socioeconomic challenges. So I'm so glad to have Dr. Wilkerson in the guest chair today.
I'm happy to be here and support you on this, what I think is a wonderful opportunity to talk about academia within some of my experience. So I can't wait for your questions. Be easy on me.
Yeah, it's a conversation. So yeah, we're gonna be easy. So I know you can talk about both sides of this journey, how it was for you as a student, but then also how it is as a person who is tasked with helping PhD students through their journey as well, right? So why don't you talk to me a little bit about what your doctorate journey was and what led you to pursue this tenure track position?
That is a it's a fantastic question. I think a fantastic opportunity to really dive into who I am. I think that all that I am or ever hope to be is as a result of the seeds that were planted in me by my parents. And they were watered when I went to FAMU. So I'm an HBCU graduate, historically Black college and university. And there at FAMU, there's this culture where, you came in and you learned, but you depart to serve. And that's from the words of Dr. Mary McLeod. And during my time at FAMU on the Hill, I never knew that Black people, and forgive me for just being straight up and honest, that Black people worked in the academy as faculty members, right? So I grew up in Miami, and I remember the nearest college that was located where my home, the parents of it's the home of my parents was FIU, but not the main campus. It was they called it back then the Biscayne Bay campus. It was like one of their satellite campuses. And my mom would go there periodically because she would be advancing, herself in terms of her own education to get degrees. And anytime I would go with her, we would run off to the library, but then we would see her meet up with other people at the end of class in the library to go over what their professor had given them information, classwork that they had given them. And all of her classmates were either Hispanic or white. And her professor met them in the library one day and they were white. And I would ask my mom, I was like, anybody there black, teaching? So I was socialized to think, even in those small experiences, that people that looked like me weren't faculty members. When I got to FAMU, everybody who looked like me was a faculty member. And even then, I hadn't decided that I wanted to be someone that worked in academia. I didn't even know what it took, to write a dissertation and things of that nature. But being at FAMU, one of the things that they taught me was that I was a leader and that there wasn't anything that I could not do. So when I decided after getting my master's that I was going to go ahead and get my doctorate, I ended up at the University of Central Florida. And the crazy thing about it is that my degrees are in political science. So naturally, you would think that a person who has a degree, undergraduate degree, and master's in political science is going to, if they're going to get a doctorate, is going to be in political science. But that wasn't the case for me. I found a program at UCF that focused on higher education and policy studies. And so I went there. Now, here's where my experience in terms of education began to shift almost immediately and in a very transformative way. At FAMU, I was seen as a student leader. My faculty members supported me in a way where I believed I could do anything. And when I got to the institution where I earned my doctorate, I remember sitting in a class being very confused because one, I didn't feel that my professor was teaching. I felt that my professor was talking to us and that our discussions was the meat of the class. And I wasn't used to that. Where they kind of showed up and they would walk in with their book and they would sit at a table. We were all situated in a conference room and they would open up the book and say, all right, any thoughts about chapter one, or any thoughts about this? And they would moderate a discussion versus maybe sit and talk with us. So that was a challenge at first because I walked into the classroom and I was looking to be poured into, and really they were trying to bring things out of me. And then that was complicated, Emmanuela, because my ideas, the thoughts that I had around education, were centered in a very, what I would call a very Afrocentric way, meaning I was always looking for how we can best support students who looked like me that were Black and they came from communities like mine, mostly urban communities, whereas my colleagues mostly would situate problems as it related to, or problems of practice as it related to African American or Black students as major issues and concerns in the academy. Let me give you an example. They would say, well, depending on a person's income background, whether or not their parents had any degrees or advanced degrees or level of education, then that would tell the story about how best we would be able to support that individual. And I was thinking to myself, but I have several friends that, their parents didn't get degrees. So it was very off-putting because I always felt like I had to defend myself and make sure that I didn't end up joining the chorus in my class that made it seem like if you weren't a white student who came from a fairly upper middle class background, that college was created for you, because I had experienced the exact difference as a college student myself. All of this contributed to me kind of putting together what I felt were the most salient points in supporting my success in academia if I was going to continue forth. And that was mentoring. And later on in my career, after becoming a doctoral student, and really getting into my work as a postdoctoral scholar and then as an assistant professor, I decided that I was going to take those experiences and package it in a book called From Student to Scholar, where I really talk about the challenges I experienced with one, socializing myself to this new academic setting, right? Two, trying to figure out who I was going to become. Was I going to be true to Amanda and learn and be open to learning, but use learning as a tool to go back and serve my community, right? Or was I going to take on the identity of the majority culture that just saw me in a very one dimensional way? And by me, I'm using myself as a sample of a larger population, and that is African American students, in particular African American women. So that in a neat nutshell is my entry into the academy. And I hope we get to kind of explore like what did that mean in terms of getting a job? What did that mean in terms of landing a tenure track position? What did that mean in terms of maintaining the work that I do, and how do I balance all of that? Because when we talk about Black Amanda being in the academy, it's not just balance, because I don't have any prior experience that I can rely on, whether it's from me or my parents, that would help me in terms of building a roadmap for really grounding the approach that I would use, or that I am using, right, to be a leader in the academy. So I hope we get to talk about those things, and I'll continue to tell stories. But a lot of the work that I do to help myself is centered around finding the right mentors, because I needed either someone who was going to be an ally to me or provide like guidance to show me the way. Because in many ways, I was like, Alice in Wonderland. I'm lost.
I love that. Not the fact that you were lost, but you spoke a lot about some good things that I think let's just go ahead and dive into. But I think for me, you spoke about mentorship. So was that something that helped you through your program? And if so, let's talk about that. I know that is a major thing when we read articles around mentorship or around under represented student populations. They talk about how mentorship is such a huge thing. So can you talk a little bit about like what that looked like for you?
Of course. So I'm gonna be honest. When I was a doctoral student, I had no idea how to help myself, and a lot of the little booby traps along the way came as a result of trial and error. Okay. How do you write this paper where you are providing a professor who isn't teaching you how to write? They are coming to class, as I mentioned before, and asking you about the information. How do you begin to write your first paper? I remember the first time I was ever told that I wasn't a good writer was as a doctoral student. And there was no explanation as to what, out of a 25, 27 page paper, no explanation as to what was written in a way that would indicate that I'm not a great writer, right? Even though it was something that I didn't believe. But when you're a student, that tends to assault your self-esteem, right? But there was no feedback about how to do it. And literally it was like, you're not a good writer, but I got an A in the class. And it was like, see you next semester, that kind of approach. So it was trial and error a lot when I was a student. And I decided first and foremost, Emmanuela, okay, you're not going to fail. It cost me too much to become a doctoral student and to get to where I was a graduate assistant. I wasn't paying for the cost of earning my graduate degree as a doctoral student. It cost me too much in terms of going through the process of applying for all of that and having that opportunity for me to just be like, oh, that one person didn't believe in me, right? And so I had to really say to myself, how are you going to make this work? Because failure wasn't an option. The only time that I thought about mentoring was when a faculty member came to me and said, hey, people have been talking about this new Black woman who is in the doctoral program for HEPS. That's our shortcut or our nickname for the program. And we have a doctoral mentoring program for Black students that's a national program, and I would like for you to apply for it. And I thought to myself, well, how's it going to help me? Because another thing that's very important is that I knew that time was of essence, right? And that I couldn't allow people to waste my time where I ended up being an ornament for a program that didn't help me meet a goal, particularly when it came to my academic endeavors as a doctoral student. So we end up talking, and I don't even know why I said yes, because initially I was just like, this is something to do, but I don't want it to waste my time. But I said yes, and it ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me because, and unfortunately, this is the case with many doctoral students who are considered racially minoritized students in the academy. You end up finding the best and most help outside of your institution. And that's what happened by joining the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education's Home Scholar Association. We would go to national conferences, and it would, for me, it was like a family reunion. I was going to see everybody, students included, and really we ended up being more like peer mentors to each other, because our mentors, yes, they would attend a national conference, but they would be over there somewhere, and we would get useful information about how to develop research ideas. And if you're an advanced doctoral student, there were sessions for you about your dissertations, but I had to lean on other doctoral students. And in this case, it helped me a lot that these doctoral students look like me, because as I mentioned earlier, my experiences was, and maybe I didn't clarify this, is that in many of my classes, I was one or the only Black person in the classroom out of the students, and they already had a interesting perspective about people that look like me. So I wasn't going to allow myself to be vulnerable to get into a peer mentoring situation. So initially it was like trial and error. I was failing at figuring out how to make this work, doing everything by, just if it worked, I put a pin in it. If it didn't work, I would move on. But in that process, getting hurt. Now, my grades were never affected, but I never got a chance to rest. When I started my doctoral program that first year until I walked across the graduation stage that third year in the summer was when I finally got to say I breathe. It was a part of me resting. Moving on professionally after I graduated, it was like, okay, who do I go to now? Because when you're not a student anymore, those systems of support break down a lot. And so I had to put on my political organizing skills and say, okay, if you're going to get this, and I didn't want the scraps in academia. I didn't want anybody to give me an opportunity that wasn't in line with my goals and my mission for my own life. Then I'm gonna have to go after it with vigor. It reminds me of a scripture that I would read constantly when I was applying for jobs. And in the scripture, I think it's Daniel who asked God, "Shall I pursue?" And God responds, yes, pursue without fail and I will deliver you. And so that's what I was doing. I was pursuing opportunities that were in line with what I wanted to do and using people who I didn't call mentors, but they were mentors. So I started off by saying when I got through grad school, it's mostly peer-to-peer mentorship. Working through my postdoctoral experiences, it was a lot of people that I think were assigned to my life to help me, but they weren't going to stay. I mean, and help me over the hump of getting the job. And many of them didn't want to be called mentors because that's an awesome responsibility. And sometimes when I call people mentors, they would balk at the idea. And then finally, when I started my job, I realized that I wasn't going to have one type of mentor that was going to help me from the beginning of the finish line with regard to my career to the end. That I was going to have a mentor that would help me with research. I was going to have a mentor that would help me with teaching. I was going to have a mentor that would help me with the complicated social network within higher education. What to do in meetings when they're having arguments about things that we can't change, you know. And so the point here that I'm trying to raise is that mentoring looked different depending on where I was in the process of my academic training to getting a job. And I had to be the one that was flexible enough to adjust and be agile to those adjustments. Else I would have missed major, and I mean this, major opportunities to advance. My mentor, the major mentor that I have right now, was not my dissertation chair. That's a big deal in higher education because most times when you go to conferences, people want to know you by who your dissertation chair was because they assume that your line of research will follow the person that got you through the doctoral process, and that's very true. My mentor doesn't look like me. She wasn't my dissertation chair. And for a person that's like really pro black, and I'm always looking for the sister hookup and the connect, I would have missed an opportunity to allow this woman to invest in my career because she was white, had a southern accent, and didn't look like me. I mean, we don't even eat alike. One day I wanted to take her out to dinner, and she didn't order any meat. I'm like, you don't eat meat? And she told me she was a vegan, and I thought, dear God, this is what my life has boiled down to.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. And again, you have a lot of nuggets in there. You talked about the power of networking, especially with that person who brought that mentorship program to you that you didn't know about. You talked about saying yes, even though you're like, I don't know what this program is really about, and trying to avoid tokenism and aligning yourself with programs that make sense with your goals, the importance of looking outside of our own programs, and that's going to be useful for people who are thinking about programs, because I think even myself, I thought that I would develop relationships with the folks that are in your program, but sometimes politics come in to play, and the way that the classroom is situated is more of competition that doesn't allow for those relationships to form. You talked about even taking as much opportunities as you can as a student, because like you said, those opportunities do drop off. And so I also like the idea of, this is what I call, but you mentioned having multiple mentors, but I like to call it like a personal board of directors, where they all serve as people that you can pull on for a variety of things. And so thank you so much for that. I think your answer too, makes me wonder, how are you seeing your students navigate through the doctoral process, and how do you see yourself as a faculty member in helping them along?
So, if someone would have asked me 2 years ago, Amanda, who's your audience for your book? Initially, I thought it was the Academy. And really, the book, in many ways, after writing it and now being in the role of an assistant professor, is really dedicated very deliberately in terms of how we wrote the book and how it's edited to future students in the academy. So, how do I see myself in supporting the students? I want students to feel as though they can really become the kind of academic that they endeavor to become. And while in the academy we have a very fixed definition of what that is and a fixed way of explaining what that looks like in terms of the work that we do, I want to give my students the flexibility to think outside of the box and empower them in a way where I'm creating a little bit of the experience I had at FAMU with the students that I have at the university that I'm teaching, which is a PWI, a predominantly white institution, Research One, right? Which is, I want you to come in to learn, but depart to serve and lead. And so I mentor my students in ways that they don't really ask for, but I know that they need, because we kind of in academia have created an environment that focuses on competition, where we rank ourselves against each other instead of saying, but let me put my purpose at the center of what I'm doing and let my work around that purpose and not compete with Amanda. Amanda may want to run for office one day. Amanda may want to have a family, and Amanda may, she may want to step out and be an entrepreneur. And if I start competing with her, it won't get me any close to what I want to do, what I'm purposed to do, and why I'm even pursuing this degree. One of the things I actively do is listen to my students, and each semester I require that they come in and they speak with me during office hours. Now, that has been hard because students come in and they think that they're just supposed to talk about a grade, or make a defense for a comment that they made in class. When in actuality, I think the thing that I am trying to get them to see is how we should approach leveraging the relationship that I'm willing to have with them so that they can tie it back to their purpose. So we come in and I ask them questions like, why are you in this program? And they may want to regurgitate every now and then what they wrote in their essay. And I didn't even, in many cases, I wasn't sitting on the committees that reviewed the essay to get them admissions into the program. And what I'm trying to find out for them is if they can tell me what it is that they want, because I want to be able to provide them with specific ways of meeting their goals where they don't have to feel like they are filtering the information and the support I will provide them through a net where they can get some stuff and it works for them, and they won't. At the same time, I'm also trying to create a model for my students, which is when you leave the academy and you decide to work in it, if you decide to work in it, that you ought to be building your students in the same way. Listen, our bodies weren't made so that we can work forever or so that we can occupy. I know the office that I occupy in my building will be occupied by someone else sooner or later, right? And so I want to create this concept that on this road from student to scholar, that we have to really figure out how we can either be a bridge to help people and not be a barrier that prevents people from meeting their goals. And this is very important. So this is how I see my mentoring with students. I am there to in a to put a bow on this comment to make sure they didn't have the experiences that I did, which is that trial and error, because that doesn't help anything.
That's a good point, and I like the fact that you're creating this model, and I wonder too, like, in some of the conversations I've been having with other folks, they talked about just the obstacles that you have to go through in your program with it seems like sometimes that the programs are built to filter people out, right? Or built to kind of minimalize your identity as a woman of color. And so how are you I don't know if you would agree with any of those, but as a faculty member, how are you helping to, I guess, create safe spaces for individuals who may be experiencing that from folks who don't look like you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I want to acknowledge up front is that, as you know, you're an academic, that colleges and universities were not created for anybody other than initially, they were not created for populations beyond wealthy white men, right? To advance their ability to get knowledge. And then thankfully, as colleges and universities became more democratized, where we were inviting in people from all different backgrounds, farmers, women, people of color, so forth and so on. I am not interested in hiding people from that history. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything safe about the fact that when you become a student, the system that was set up was not ideally created around your positionality. But what I want to do is allow students to be brave in those spaces and confront it in a way where they can get through and accomplish their goals, but not create the same sort of, I want to say, conjecture that ends up corrosively inhibiting others from being just as successful, right? So right now, I have a pronounced focus on helping minoritized individuals pursue their doctorate. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the kind of support I can provide them will help them get through. In terms of, I remember arguing with one of my professors. She was saying, she had brought up, I will never forget this, she had brought up a case where we were looking at a woman in Texas who had put out a lawsuit because she felt that a black student had occupied her space. And the professor went on to discuss that the black students had a lower GPA than the student who was suing and she didn't get in. My point all along wasn't to look at the GPA. That's one factor. I wanted to look at the privilege of a person that thought that she could pinpoint that a black person or a minority person took my seat without saying to herself, well, what did I do to deserve to be here? And why does she think that she was entitled to the seat? And how does she think that admissions worked against her before these people? Like, that is a mentality that I, as a black woman, don't even have the privilege of using, and I don't even use when I'm thinking about why I get into certain doors and I don't get into other doors. And so, while that is pervasive, if I if I support students with the tools to think about how they maneuver around that without it being a problem, because the reality is people come to school to learn, right? And if I don't want them to be in an environment that stops them from learning. I also don't want them to be in an environment where they're not learning. So the way that I support them is to say, yeah, all of these things exist, but don't argue with your professor like Dr. Wilkerson did. And the professor get pissed off, and now you don't know what kind of grade you're going to get because you write papers, and that is subjective. And you already saw the kind of feedback that you get. It can make your life miserable. I also don't allow students to make me an emotional pillow, which is they sit down and they want to unload everything on me because we have something in common, right? What I really try to do is empower them, and like I said, make it brave spaces, and to your point, safe. So these are the ways that I look at it, and to a larger extent in my writing, I am trying to find ways where we also support the students that are not necessarily in the spaces that we're in, so that professionals and practitioners can think about their approaches and really not practice their privilege on us in a way where it ends up hurting students in the long run. So taking a lot of accountability and responsibility for my actions, for the students that I'm working with, and using my research to speak to the practitioners in the field. It's a lot. It can't all be done by one person, but I am very focused on how we do it for students, and that's my approach. In my work with others, people have a way of figuring out how they want to address this issue, and since it's so systematic, I don't think one single approach can work, which is why I'm glad so many different people are really figuring out ways to deal with racism in the academy. One thing, and I'm gonna go off on the trail, so bring me back in, that surprised me is over the summer there was a hashtag that I would read and just be like, dear God, is this happening? It's called Black in the Academy. And people would really write all
Mhm.
of these interesting little stories or narratives of what was happening to them and how these experiences were ignored by their colleagues, or some people didn't get jobs. And it was obvious that race or racism was a factor. And we were blind to it. And so I think that we have to continue to push the needles in various different ways to really crack at the systematic, I would say, failure of the academy not dealing with racism. It's hard, Emmanuel. I wish I had a answer, but there really isn't a simple one because the problem is so widespread.
It is, and a lot of people don't talk about it, and a lot of people assume that the academy is a welcoming, space for people when especially when they compare it to maybe, like, the corporate setting, which I think is why, a lot of people of color are drawn to working in higher education and things of that nature, and so, like, with that at play, what kind of, propelled you to seek a position in which you are now a faculty in the system, talk to us about that, because I'm sure there are, some folks that I've spoken to before that are just like they don't even want to go that route because of, their personal experiences or experiences they've heard from others.
Yeah, so I graduated August 2016, and I walked across the stage and I was very hopeful and excited. Like my doctoral journey was completed. And at the end of the other stage, at the opposite end of the stage that I just walked across, reality set in. I didn't have a job. It was August. And I was going to pack up my apartment that day. I rented my somebody gonna get blessed by hearing this. I rented my robe for graduation, so I had to turn that in before a certain time, and at the same time balance turning in my graduation robe, uh, closing out my apartment, or making sure everything was packed in, and I had to go home. And every day I would wake up because my mother's an administrator and my dad is a teacher as well as a pastor, but he's bivocational, so he's a teacher. I would wake up and hear them getting ready, going out the door, and then I would kind of get ready behind them and pray because I didn't know how I was going to become a faculty member. And I didn't want anybody to talk me out of becoming a faculty member based on the kind of credential that I earned or the research that I was interested in doing or the fact that I had graduated in the late summer. And without knowing what to do, I just started calling random people like, "Hey, can I send you my CV? I'm looking for a faculty job and, even if you don't have a role, could you give me feedback?" Um all the people that I called never really gave me anything that I could hang my hat on, if you will. But the new incoming dean at the university that I graduated from, she came to my class and I was doing my Amanda stuff, which in many cases is self aggrandizement, talking about all the great things I'm going to do one day. And she kind of reached out to me by an email and said, "I don't know if you still have access to this email, but if you do, give me a call." So I called her assistant and I was like, "I think the dean is trying to reach out to me." And she said, "Oh, yeah, she wants me to set up an appointment with you. When can you come in?" Emmanuela, my car, I'm setting this all up because some people seem to think in their mind that maybe one, that some of this stuff is automatic. I know a lot of people that did not walk out of the academy and join the rank of faculty members right away, and there have been those who can. But to the person who has it, I want you to believe that you can do it, right? And that you don't have to worry about time as a barometer for whether or not it will happen. I need to tell myself that when I'm thinking about wanting to be married. But the point of the matter is that she set up a meeting with the dean. My car was not working to take me to campus, which now is about an hour and a half away from where my parents live. So I'm
Mm.
hustling to get just somebody give me a car. Cynthia, my sisters, can you let me borrow your car? And nobody wants to give me a car to drive an hour and a half away to do maybe an hour meeting. But I get my sister's car, and I mean, I'm driving down and I don't know why she's there. I'm thinking to myself, I don't even have money to put in my sister's gas tank to take me this far. Why are you doing this to yourself? So I get there and I'm waiting around nervously for the dean to assistant to welcome me into the meeting, and I'm sitting in a conference room. The dean comes in. She just asked, "Tell me about your research." And so I started talking, and in my mind I'm like, she could have emailed me this because I'm thinking about the car ride home, Emanuela. And then finally she said, "Well, I got this project and you would be right for it. I am going to hire you as a postdoctoral scholar." Now, I should back up and say that I applied to be a postdoctoral scholar with Columbia Teachers College. I mean, I had gotten recommendations from HBCU presidents, Tom Joyner, who was the at that time executive director of a foundation that supported HBCUs. They wrote lovely letters for me. I did work in Florida, so I knew all of the Florida HBCU presidents because I hosted the Florida State of HBCUs, and they were all panelists. So I got the president of EWC, Florida Memorial, FAMU, Bethune Cookman to write recommendation letters in addition to faculty members that taught me. And I thought I was good. And Teachers College said they never got my application. So when the dean said, I'm going to hire you as a postdoc, I thought, ooh, vindication. I'm going to get hired as a postdoc. And then she said, but this, I can only pay you this much. Now, at Teachers College, just for comparison, they would pay you about 36,000 at that time, but you didn't have to worry about housing, which is a big deal in New York. Because if I would have got 60,000, half or a quarter of that, maybe, a little bit more than a quarter would have gone to housing, trying to figure out housing in New York, right? So she pushed the paper towards me. I flipped it over. It was the most amount of money that I had made in my adult life, and it was more money than my parents were making as educators in the public school system. So that's that. And I said
Mhm.
yes. It wasn't a faculty role, but it wasn't too far off from what I wanted that would position me to get a faculty role. And she has been the key to my success entering the academy as a faculty member because she didn't use that opportunity to just let me go and write what I wanted to write. Mm-mm. She provided mentorship. She gave me the dean provided access to her every week. We would have a standing meeting, and it wasn't lunch and let's talk about how's your personal life. We came in and she would say, what are the 3 articles you want to write this year? That's how I developed my book. I said, I want to write a book so people will understand how to use mentoring. But that was in the second year of my postdoc. So I got the postdoc, had that for 2 years, and people started interviewing me for faculty roles. I got interviewed at different colleges in the Northeastern part. I don't want to shout them out because I don't work there, and I turned them down. But they started calling the dean because she's my reference. And then she says, well, what about staying here and working here? And so, as fate would have it, I actually work at the institution that I got my doctoral degree from. But that is because I'm doing the work, right? They didn't bring me in because they like me, because that gets you into the door. Maybe that gets certain people in the door. But for me, what got me into the door is having someone who had created the pathway and was giving me guidance on how to walk this journey and then opening doors for me. Like she was a very hands on mentor, but she never taught me. And so this is what I mean. I hope that people are getting that sometimes people will be in your life for specific reasons, and you have to be open, not open to just allowing anybody to come into your life, but open to saying, okay, this is new and this is different and it's not according to plan, but I'm going to submit to doing this to the highest fidelity that I can because this may take me to places I never imagined, and I'll be doggone. My mother ended up getting cancer my last year, my first year of my postdoc, and I had made up in my mind I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to get that phone call saying something is going wrong, and I'm way across the country. We know how it is when emerging academics start out in their first tenure track position. They may be hired and do what diddly, and they're nowhere close to people that look like them. But I've been fortunate that I didn't even have to go out of the city that I got my own degree in, the town where my parents live in, to work in. And that's a blessing. And I protect that blessing by doing the work, and sowing into others in the same way my mentor, I would say in the same spirit. Cause I don't have the social capital right now just yet to sewing them the same way that she did in me. But this is a nod to mentors that you have to do more than say, I see potential. Let me bring them in. And here's the access to an opportunity. She saw my potential. She brought me in and she said, now, what is it that you want to do? Okay, here's the pathway. We've created it. And how do you want to do it? Okay, let me open the door. And that has been the big difference.
Wow. I think and you started off saying this is going to be a blessing for somebody. That was a great story of just So much. Like, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like, you walk across that stage and you don't know what's coming, right? You're like, I hope something, happens. You just did this whole thing. You sacrificed a lot of time and energy, and, you're not sure. But then also, your mentor, who I would even say she's probably, more of a sponsor for you to like guide you, speak your name in rooms that you are not a part of, right? And so there's so much value in that for sure. And so I appreciate you sharing that story. And I think a lot of people will be inspired by that. Um, and so if you're okay with it, I think this is the time to jump into the lightning round. Are you
Yes,
ready?
let's go for it. I told you I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. So let's go for it.
Awesome. So this is a time where you just share a quick answer to the questions that I share, and thinking about it in terms of like your doctoral process, or maybe even like you as a faculty member and things like that. So what is your favorite mantra?
So my favorite mantra is something that my grandmother taught us growing up. I was a bad girl, but she would say, "If a task is once begun, never leave it until it's done. Be the laborer, big or small, do it well or not at all." And it's just, I don't know who it's written by, so sorry. I'm not trying to misquote anybody. It certainly wasn't written by me, but what it reminds me of is that no matter what I'm doing, whether it's big, whether it's important in the eyes of others or just significant individually, that I have to give it my best. And so it's something that I have used throughout my entire life thus far.
I love that. And I feel like I've heard that before. I don't know where. Okay, I have to look it up.
Look it up. I hope it's not Dr. Seuss because my grandmother was like a preschool teacher. So I don't know.
All right. One thing you couldn't live without.
Oh my God, I couldn't live without my family because we crack each other up. We love each other. People know that once they marry into, I have only sisters. Our family, like, we're close knit. It's us. We are strong. So it's family for me.
Awesome. Love that. Favorite hype song?
My favorite, I'm a gospel girl, God. So you put on any like church bop shouting music, and for people that are listening to this, if you don't know what a shouting music is, it's just that high speed drum beat where people get to tearing up the floor. If you put that on, I'm good to go. But another maybe song that gets me hype for people that are just like, what is shouting music? If you put on Beyonce, Who Run the World Girls, like that's my, especially if I know I'm about to be on a panel and I'm only going to be the only woman or black woman or something like that, I will blast her in my ear just to give me a little, bit of courage.
Awesome. Good old gospel music or even Beyonce. Yes. Go to practice to celebrate your wins.
Okay. I am a habitual online shopper, and I will buy things and purposely space it out so I don't know what comes. So what I like to do is, and lately I've been on Nordstrom's. So I like to buy expensive perfumes because I'm like a smellologist, and like to space out when it gets delivered. Anything with bergamot, I'm a buy. So perfume.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. And I didn't even know what bergamot was until I got an infuser and it has bergamot. And I was like, what is that? I don't even know.
Love bergamot. Yes.
Okay, maybe now I can appreciate that scent. Okay. Best piece of advice you received as a student.
The best advice that I receive is to read, write, and repeat, read deeply, and to read widely.
Awesome. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. This
Mm.
has been good to, just chat with you. And I know, like I said before, we collaborate on different research projects and things like that. And I learned even more about you today. And I know
Oh,
this is going to be a blessing to other folks. So I appreciate you, being a guest on the show today. So before you leave, though, could you share how people can, follow you, how they can connect with you, and even how they can find your book and support you in that way?
Sure. Thank you again for the opportunity to be on the show. I'm excited to talk about things like this because I wish this was in place when I was, going through my doctoral journey where I can just be inspired and encouraged that I'm not at this alone. With regard to reaching out and connecting with me, I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and my social media handles are at Dr. A.V. Wilkerson. Also, I would love for people to check out our book, From Student to Scholar, Mentoring Underrepresented Scholars in the Academy. And you can find this particular book on Palgraf Macmillan's website, or you can DM me and I will connect you to that work. So, yeah, thank you again. This has been awesome and very cathartic around the this time to talk about it, given all that's going on with COVID. It makes me think about things I should be thankful for.
I've enjoyed this conversation too. I appreciate it. And I'll definitely tag all of your contact information and where people can get the book in the show notes as well. Thanks again, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and spread the word to other women of color doctoral students to grow our community. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emmanuela. And if you're looking for a group of real women of color doctoral students to help you accomplish your goals, join the Writing on My Mind community by visiting writingonmymindpodcast.com. See you on the next episode.